There's a moment near the end of the first season of Game of Thrones that I think about more than any other. Ned Stark has worked it out. He's spent weeks in a city he hates, reading dusty ledgers and talking to armourers and asking questions that keep getting people killed. And he's finally got the answer. Cersei's children aren't Roberts. They're Jaime's, every one of them. It's the secret that got Jon Arryn poisoned, and it's now sitting in Ned's head like a live coal. And what does he do with it? He walks into the Godswood, tells Cersei to her face that he knows, and then he gives her a head start. He tells her to take her children and run, because he doesn't want to see them hurt. He looks the most dangerous woman in the Seven Kingdoms in the eye, hands her the one piece of information that can destroy her, and then politely offers her time to prepare. Cersei's response is the famous line about how when you play the Game of Thrones you win or you die, there is no middle ground. And she's right. She's completely right. But what I love about that scene, and what I've never quite got over, is that Ned isn't being stupid in the way we normally mean stupid. He's being decent. He genuinely believes that giving her a chance to flee is the right thing to do. And he's so certain of that, he doesn't stop to consider that she might use the time to have him killed instead, which she does, almost immediately. So that's what tonight is about. We're going to spend the next couple of hours going through Westeros, house by house, person by person, and talking about all the decisions that make you sit up and go, hang on, not plot holes, not bad writing mostly. I mean actual choices made by actual characters who had the information they needed to know better, and who went ahead and did the thing anyway. Ned's not the only one, not by a long way. This is a world where the smartest people alive keep walking into rooms they shouldn't walk into, trusting people they shouldn't trust, and making the exact same mistake their grandfather made, with better dragons. I want to say up front that I love this show. All of it, more or less, including the bits everyone agrees, are a mess. This isn't a takedown. It's more like when you've watched something enough times that you start noticing the seams, and instead of ruining it, it kind of makes you fonder of it. Like a friend who's brilliant at their job and cannot parallel park. The plan is that we wander. We'll do Ned, then Robert, then Cersei and Joffrey while we're in King's Landing. Then north to the Starks, then across to Essos. There's a whole chunk on the Battle of Winterfell where I get a bit carried away. And there's a section near the end about the Targaryens before any of this happened, because most of the mess we're talking about started long before Ned ever rode south. Nothing builds, nothing peaks. If you drift off during the bit about Theon and surface again somewhere in the middle of the Iron Bank, you'll have lost nothing, because there's nothing to lose. It's all just sat there next to itself. If you enjoy this sort of thing and want more of it, there's a subscribe button down there somewhere, and it costs you nothing. But that's the last I'll say about it. Right, pillow sorted. Let's talk about the cleverest people in Westeros making the worst decisions available to them with completely straight faces for 8 years. Let's start with Ned, because everything starts with Ned, and I want to be fair to him before I start pulling the thing apart. Because Ned Stark gets a reputation as a bit of a fool, and I don't think that's right at all. The man is a competent battlefield commander. He won a war. He rode down the King's Road and broke the Targaryen dynasty. He fought his way to the Tower of Joy against the finest swordsmen of the age, and he ran the North for 17 years without a single rebellion, famine or crisis. Winterfell under Ned Stark is the best governed place in the story. His people love him. His children mostly love him. He's a good lord in a world that has almost none. He's also a rather good detective, which people forget. Robert hands him the hand's job, and within a few weeks Ned has solved a murder that the entire small council either couldn't solve or didn't want to. He works out that Jon Arryn was investigating something. He follows the thread to the armoury, to Gendry, to that book of lineages. He notices that every Baratheon in recorded history has black hair, and that Cersei's 3 children are gold from root to tip, That's proper investigative work. Nobody handed it to him. So the problem with Ned is not that he's thick. The problem is that Ned is playing a completely different game to everyone else at the table, and nobody's told him the rules have changed. He thinks he's in a story about duty. He's actually in a story about leverage, and that's the lens I want to use for the whole night. So I'll say it once properly, and then leave it alone. Ned's mistakes all come from the same place. He keeps assuming that other people are operating on the same code he is, that a promise means something, that the law is a real thing rather than a story powerful people tell each other, that when you show someone the truth, they'll accept it, because that's what he would do. It's not naivety exactly, it's a kind of moral confidence. He's so sure of the rules that it never seriously occurs to him that other people might simply not be playing. Which brings us back to the Godswood. Telling Cersei is the big one. It's the domino, everything after it, Robert's death, the war, the Red Wedding, the Boltons, all of it falls out of that conversation, and there's no version of it that makes tactical sense. If he'd said nothing, Robert comes back from the hunt, and Ned tells him instead, and Cersei is finished. If he'd sent Sansa and Arya home first and then told Robert, he'd have had a proper hand to play. Instead, he warns her, buys her the time she needs, and doesn't take a single precaution in the meantime. He doesn't move his daughters. He doesn't send word to Winterfell. He doesn't tell Robert on the way out the door. He just goes back to his rooms and waits. Robert, meanwhile, gets a hunting trip, an endless supply of wine from a Lannister cousin, and a boar. Funny how that works out. But the Godswood isn't even the first bad call. Let's go back a bit, because there's a lovely little sequence of them. There's the moment where Robert tells the small council that Daenerys is pregnant and orders her killed, and Ned says no, which, morally, good. Ordering the murder of a teenage girl on another continent is dishonourable, cowardly, and beneath their dignity, and Ned says exactly that. Every other person in that room, Pycelle, Renly, Littlefinger, agrees Daenerys has to go. Ned refuses and resigns as hand on the spot. Now I actually admire that. But look at the timing. Ned is, at that precise moment, sitting in a city where he has no allies, no army, and one open enemy who happens to be the Queen. And his response to a disagreement with the king is to hand back the only official protection he's got. He resigns the position that gives him authority over the city watch, the small council, and the treasury, while he's mid-investigation into the Queen's treason. He's about 8 moves into a chess game, and he voluntarily gives away his own queen because he doesn't like where she's standing. Robert never reinstates him, mind, but only after Cersei's already had time to work. Then there's the street fight. Catelyn, up in the Riverlands, arrests Tyrion Lannister on a hunch and drags him off to the Vale. Jaime finds out and corners Ned outside Littlefinger's brothel with about 20 men. Ned's guards Heward and Will are dead in the opening seconds. Jory takes a dagger through the eye, and Ned, to his credit, holds his own against Jaime long enough that Jaime starts to look properly worried, until a Lannister guardsman stabs Ned through the leg with a spear, and the whole thing ends in the mud. The bit I love is that Jaime is annoyed about the spear. He knocks the man out for interrupting, says he wants his brother back, and walks off. But rewind 5 seconds. Ned started that fight. He drew on Jaime Lannister in the middle of King's Landing over something his wife did that he had no part in, while he was investigating the family that Jaime belongs to. He picks a physical fight with the Lannisters before he has a single friend in that city. It's the strategic equivalent of poking a bear because your wife annoyed it first. And then there's Littlefinger, who deserves his own paragraph. Ned trusts Petyr Baelish, genuinely trusts him, in the sense of putting his life in the man's hands. And here's the fun detail. Littlefinger tells him not to, repeatedly. He tells Ned to his face that he shouldn't trust him, and Ned hears this and files it away as modesty, as a sort of self-deprecating charm. He takes a man saying, "I am not a trustworthy person," as evidence of good character, because in the north, that's what it would be. Only a decent man would warn you. So when it comes time to arrest Joffrey and install Stannis, Ned's plan rests entirely on Littlefinger having bought the City Watch. And Littlefinger has bought the City Watch. He's just bought it for the other side. Janos Slint turns, the gold cloaks turn, and Ned's men are dead on the floor of the throne room in about 4 seconds. Littlefinger puts a dagger to his throat and says he did warn him not to trust him. He did. Once, actually. And then the last one, which is the saddest, Ned confesses. He stands in front of the whole city and says the thing he spent his entire life refusing to say, that he betrayed the king, that Joffrey is the true heir, because Varys convinces him it'll save Sansa's life. He trades the one thing he actually cares about, his honour, for his daughter. It's the only genuinely political thing he does in the whole season, and it's the right call. And it doesn't matter, even slightly. Joffrey has him executed anyway, on a whim, on the steps of the Great Sept, in front of both his girls. There's something bleakly funny about that if you look at it side on. Ned finally learns to lie, and it turns out lying doesn't work either, because the person he's lying to isn't playing the game at all. He's just a child with an axe. Anyway, 9 episodes and the man's gone, and every single thing that happens for the next 7 years is downstream of that head coming off. Not bad for someone who was only supposed to be visiting, but it's a bit unfair to lay all this at Ned's door, because the man he was working for was, in a lot of ways, worse. So let's talk about Robert. I want to come at this one sideways, because I don't think Robert Baratheon is really the problem. The building is the problem. The Red Keep is, functionally, a workplace. There's an executive, there's a board, there's a treasury, there's a security division, and a legal department. On paper, it's a government. In practice, it's the worst run organisation on the continent, and the Night's Watch is on that continent. So I want you to understand the size of the claim I'm making. The Watch at least has the excuse of being broke, frozen, and staffed by convicts. King's Landing has money, sunshine, and the pick of the realm, and it's worse. Everyone in that building knows exactly what everyone else is doing, and the collective decision is to say nothing and hope it's someone else's problem. Start with the money, because it's the detail that made my jaw drop the first time I properly clocked it. The crown is 6 million gold dragons in debt. 3 million of that is owed to House Lannister, which is to say, to the Queen's father. The rest is mostly owed to the Iron Bank of Braavos and the Faith. When Robert took the throne, the treasury was full. Aerys was mad, but he wasn't broke. Robert has managed, in a generation of unbroken peace, to bankrupt a kingdom that was solvent when he got it. And when Ned points this out, when the newly appointed Hand of the King sits down, reads the ledgers, and says, in effect, we appear to be catastrophically insolvent, Robert's response is to throw a tournament. Not a small one. A tournament with a prize purse so large that it makes the whole meaningfully worse. Ned tells him they can't afford it. Robert tells him to borrow it. From the Lannisters, to whom they already owe 3 million. Littlefinger is master of coin throughout all of this. Nobody audits him. Not once. Not one person in that building ever asks to see the books. And it takes until Tyrion sits down with them in a later season for anyone to notice that Littlefinger's accounting is a work of creative fiction. The man is skimming an entire kingdom's revenue into his own patronage network for years, in plain sight, and the oversight mechanism is nil. There isn't one. That's not a scandal in Westeros, that's just Tuesday. Then there's how Robert spends his time. He's the king. He has one actual job, which is deciding things. And the two things we see him do most are hunt and drink, usually together. There's a scene out in the Kingswood that I think is the most quietly damning in the whole first season. Robert's on the hunt with Renly, Barristan Selmy, and Lancel Lannister. He's getting steadily drunker, because Lancel is refilling his cup roughly every 40 seconds, and he's going on about the old days, about young knights making a name for themselves. about how the enemy used to stand out in the open instead of hiding behind schemes. He's boasting about all the women he's had, and Renly finally snaps and calls him a fool and points out that the past he's romanticising was violent as hell, and he's just choosing not to remember that part. Renly storms off. Barristan looks concerned. Lancel keeps pouring. That's it. That's the government. A drunk man nostalgic for a war he won, being kept drunk by a boy whose family's about to kill him, while the only competent person present quietly worries and says nothing. And it's Lancel's wine that does it, in the end. The boar hunt isn't an accident. Cersei has him topped up with strong wine until a man who's killed hundreds of people in battle can't handle a pig. But look at the appointments, because that's where you really see it. Robert keeps Jaime Lannister in his Kingsguard for 17 years. Jaime, the man who murdered the previous king. The man Robert openly despises, whom he calls a kingslayer to his face, whom he doesn't trust, doesn't like, and doesn't respect. And Robert gives him a white cloak and a permanent posting inside his own bedroom's radius. 2 decades of a man you consider a traitor standing outside your door with a sword. Nobody thinks this is odd. It's fine. It's a Lannister thing, and the Lannisters are owed 3 million. Then the Daenerys order. Robert wants a pregnant teenager on another continent assassinated, and when Ned refuses, Robert is genuinely, incandescently furious. Not because he's thought it through, Cersei of all people points out that the Dothraki can't cross the narrow sea because they haven't got ships, and she's completely right, but because Robert has been afraid of the Targaryens for 2 decades, and fear is the only thing he's got left that feels like purpose. What kills me is that the assassination attempt is what makes Daenerys dangerous. Before the wine merchant, she's a frightened girl in a marriage she didn't choose. After the wine merchant, Drogo swears to conquer the 7 kingdoms for her son. Robert's fear creates the exact threat he's afraid of. He reaches across the world to squash a girl who wasn't coming, and in doing so, he gives her a reason and an army. And when Ned resigns over it, Robert's response is to threaten to give the hand's job to Jaime Lannister. That's the alternative he reaches for. The Kingslayer. The one man in the realm who has already killed a king he was sworn to protect. Robert says this out loud, as a threat, apparently without hearing himself. I do want to defend him a bit though, because I don't think Robert's an idiot, and I don't think he's evil. He's a man who was brilliant at exactly one thing, winning a war, and who got handed a job that had nothing to do with that thing, and who spent the rest of his life knowing he was bad at it. He says as much. He knows. There's a real sadness to him that the drinking doesn't quite cover. He wanted enemies he could hit. What he got was a small council, a spreadsheet, and a wife who hated him. The trouble is that a man who knows he's bad at his job, and does it anyway, for the whole of his reign, is, in practical terms, indistinguishable from a man who doesn't care. The realm doesn't get to appreciate his tragic self-awareness. The realm just gets the 6 million in debt. Now, since we're already in King's Landing and nobody's going anywhere, let's talk about the person who is actually running it. I want to start this one in the middle, because there's a single decision Cersei makes that contains everything else about her, and it's not the one people usually pick. She arms the faith. Here's the situation. Margaery Tyrell has married Tommen, and Cersei is being systematically squeezed out of her own son's life by a girl half her age who is better at politics than she is. Cersei can't outmaneuver her, so she goes to the High Sparrow, this austere little fanatic who's been washing the feet of the poor in Flea Bottom, and she restores the faith militant. She rearms a religious order that the crown disbanded 2 centuries earlier, gives them legal authority, and points them at the Tyrells. And it works. That's the thing. It works beautifully. Loras gets arrested, Margaery gets arrested. Cersei stands at a window and watches her rival get dragged into a cell, and for about 4 minutes, she has won completely. Then they arrest her. Because of course they do. Because the entire premise of a fanatical religious order is that it doesn't take instruction, and Cersei has spent her whole life around people who take instruction. And she has never once considered what happens when you hand a weapon to someone who isn't for sale. Her actual crimes, the incest, the murders, the cousin, are exactly the sort of thing the faith exists to punish. She armed the one group in Westeros that could not be bribed, blackmailed, or married into an alliance, and she did it on purpose. And then she walks, barefoot, head shaved, through her own capital from the Great Sept to the Red Keep, while the people she rules throw filth at her and scream. It's the single most humiliating thing that happens to any character in the series, and she constructed it herself, brick by brick, out of a desire to inconvenience a teenager. So then she blows up the Sept, which, again, works. That's what I find so fascinating about Cersei. Her plans work. They just work in the way that setting your house on fire works as a solution to a wasp problem. She fills the tunnels beneath the Great Sept of Baelor with wildfire, doesn't show up for her own trial, and detonates the lot. And in one afternoon she solves every problem she has ever had. The High Sparrow gone. The Faith Militant gone. Margaery gone. Loras gone. Mace Tyrell gone. Keevan Lannister, who was the last competent adult in her family, and who had been quietly boxing her out of the council, gone. Lancel, who knew about the wine, gone. It is, on paper, the most efficient political manoeuvre in the entire show. She removes 6 rivals with one act and takes the Iron Throne outright. And then Tommen, who has just watched his wife and his religion and his entire moral universe evaporate through a window, walks across his room, takes off his crown, and steps out of it. That's the bit. That's the whole thing. She solved every problem and lost the only thing she actually wanted. The prophecy about her children was hanging over her from the very first flashback, and she spent her entire life trying to outrun it. And in the end, she's the one who caused it. Every single time. Joffrey dies at a wedding she orchestrated. Myrcella dies in Dawn, where Cersei's own war made enemies. Tommen dies because she blew up his wife. She's not a victim of the prophecy. She's the delivery mechanism. The wildfire, by the way, is the Mad King's. That's the detail I always come back to, and I'm not going to belabor it because we'll be back at Aerys later on tonight. But it's worth sitting with for a second. Jaime Lannister broke the most sacred oath in the Seven Kingdoms and wore the name Kingslayer for 20 years specifically to stop that wildfire being used on that city. And his sister found it and used it. He gave up his entire reputation to prevent one thing, and the person he loved most in the world did the thing anyway. And he wasn't even in the room. Right, let's go backwards, because the pattern starts early. Season 1, The King's Road. Arya's direwolf Nymeria bites Joffrey after Joffrey attacks Mycah with a sword, and Nymeria runs off, and Cersei demands a wolf be killed anyway. So Robert has Sansa's wolf lady put down. Lady who did nothing, who was sitting quietly somewhere else entirely, and Ned does it himself because he won't let a stranger do it. Now what does Cersei actually get out of that? Nothing. There's no advantage, there's no leverage. She's just made a permanent, unhealing enemy of the Warden of the North's eldest daughter, and of the Warden of the North himself, over a dog, 3 weeks into a journey where she needed that man to be neutral. Cersei has an instinct for the immediate win and a complete blindness to the week after. It's there from the first episode. Then Robert. She has him killed at exactly the moment she has the least control over what happens next. Her heir is Joffrey. She knows what Joffrey is, she's raised him, she's watched him, and her plan is to put him on a throne in the middle of a succession crisis and hope for the best. She kills the one man whose personal authority was holding the realm's factions in place, and she hands the crown to a 12-year-old sadist, and then she's surprised when it goes badly. There's a wonderful scene where Tyrion arrives in King's Landing as acting hand and just lays into her. He points out that she's failed to rein in Joffrey, that the execution of Ned Stark sparked a war they're currently losing, and that they had 3 Stark hostages and now have 1, because Arya vanished into the city and nobody's been able to find her. He's incredulous about it. 3 hostages. They could have had the entire North by post. And then the last one, right at the end of it all, the Dragon Pit. Everyone gets in a room. Jon, Daenerys, Cersei, Tyrion, Jaime, Brienne, the lot. They bring an actual white in a box. They let it out. It screams and lunges at Cersei's face, and she watches it get cut in half and keep moving. She sees with her own eyes that the dead are walking and coming south, and she agrees to send her armies north. And then she doesn't. She tells Jaime she was lying, that she's going to let them all fight it out in the north and mop up whatever's left with the Golden Company, 20,000 sellswords she's buying with Iron Bank money. Now here's my problem with that, and it's not the treachery. The treachery is very on brand. It's that the plan requires the dead to lose. Her entire strategy, the whole thing, is predicated on the Night King being defeated by an army she deliberately weakened. If the North falls, which, given she's just watched the evidence, is rather the likelier outcome, the army of the dead marches south to a capital defended by sellswords, with no dragons and no dragon glass and no Valyrian steel. She has bet the continent on her enemies winning a fight she's actively sabotaging. And Harry Strickland's elephants don't even turn up. That's the punchline. The Golden Company arrives, and Euron didn't bring the elephants. I'll say this for her though, and I mean it. Cersei is tactically brilliant. Genuinely. Give her a room, a rival, and an afternoon, and she will win. She reads people beautifully. She understands leverage in a way Ned never did in his life. If the world were nothing but individual encounters, she'd have run the place for 50 years. The trouble is that the world isn't a room, it's a map, and every single time Cersei wins the room, the map gets worse. She wins against Ned and starts a war. She wins against Margaery and gets a walk of atonement. She wins against the Faith and loses her last son. She wins against Daenerys at the Dragon Pit and ends up under a collapsing castle with her brother, which is, I'll admit, more mercy than most of her victims got. Anyway, a lot of that traces back to the boy, so let's talk about Joffrey for a bit. Though not for long, because there's honestly not that much to say. Joffrey Baratheon makes exactly one decision that matters, and it's the most consequential decision in the entire series, and he makes it because he was bored. Here's the setup. Ned Stark is in a cell. He's confessed. He's publicly named Joffrey as the true heir and admitted his own treason in front of the whole city. The deal is done. Ned takes the black, goes to the wall and disappears from politics forever. Everybody's agreed. Cersei's agreed. Varys negotiated it. Tywin's plan requires it, because Tywin's whole strategy is to hold Ned as a chip against Robb. Sansa has begged for her father's life and been granted it, and Joffrey stands up in front of 10,000 people and calls for his head. The project histories put it about as plainly as you can put anything. On a whim, the psychopathic Joffrey foolishly has Ned Stark beheaded on the very steps of the Great Sept, plunging the Seven Kingdoms into the War of the Five Kings. On a whim. That's the operative bit. Not a plan, not a calculation. He fancied it. And the war that follows kills, at a rough count, tens of thousands of people, burns the Riverlands to the ground, cripples 3 great houses, and ends with his own family line fractured and his own capital intact, but tense, all of it, every bit of it, because a 13-year-old wanted to see something. What I find quietly hilarious about Joffrey is that he keeps getting handed enormous strategic advantages and throwing them in a bin. The Stark girls are the perfect example. 2 hostages, both daughters of the man leading the rebellion. Tyrion works out immediately what that's worth. With 3 Stark hostages, the Lannister position would have been immeasurably stronger, and by the time he arrives, they've lost one entirely, and nobody quite knows when. Arya walked out of King's Landing, dressed as a boy in a Night's Watch recruitment party, and it takes them years to even start looking properly. Cersei eventually tasks Littlefinger with finding Sansa, which is a bit like asking the fox to look into the chicken situation. Then he redecorates the throne room. He never asks Tywin for help finding Arya, and the show never gives a reason for it. He blames his own grandfather for losing battles Joffrey wasn't at. He asks his mother directly about the rumours regarding his parentage, which is possibly the only sensible question he ever asks. And when she slaps him, he threatens to have her killed for it. He has Janos Slynt massacre Robert's bastards across the city. Infants, a baby called Barra, killed in a brothel in front of her mother. There's no strategic purpose. There's no thinking. It's just what happens when you give somebody like this the machinery of a state and no supervision. He orders a knight drowned in wine for falling off a horse on his name day. Sansa saves the man's life by pointing out that a death on a name day is bad luck, which Joffrey dismisses as superstition until Sandor Clegane backs her up, at which point it becomes true. That's the sum total of Joffrey's decision-making apparatus. Bad luck is nonsense, unless a large man agrees. I want to say one more thing about him, and it's the reason this section is short. Joffrey isn't making mistakes. Not really. Every other person we're talking about tonight is trying to achieve something and getting it wrong. Ned wants justice and gets a sword. Cersei wants safety and manufactures the disaster. Robb wants to win and loses. They're all failing at goals. Joffrey has no goals. He's not trying to get anything. He's doing precisely what he wants at all times. And he succeeds constantly. And the wreckage that follows is genuinely not his problem because he doesn't experience consequence as a concept. You can't call it a bad decision because the decision implies weighing something. He's not weighing, he's just a will with a crown on it. Which is why the poisoning at his own wedding, the purple wedding, is such an oddly satisfying piece of engineering rather than a tragedy. By the time Olenna Tyrell drops the stone from Sansa's necklace into that cup, the list of people with a strong motive to kill Joffrey includes his uncle, his wife's grandmother, his wife's entire family, half of the court, the North, the Riverlands, the Vale, and arguably his own mother on a bad day. He spent 4 years turning every person who could protect him into someone who'd rather he didn't exist. The murder wasn't hard to arrange. The hard part must have been keeping the list down to a manageable number of conspirators. Right, that's a good place to head north, because the Starks were about to start making some choices of their own, and they weren't much better. Here's my favourite statistic in Game of Thrones. Robb Stark never lost a battle, not one. Whispering Wood, Oxcross, the Battle of the Camps, the Crag, the boy is 16 years old. He's never commanded so much as a hunting party before his father's arrest. And he goes south and beats Jaime Lannister, who has been fighting professionally since Robb was born. He splits his army. He uses the direwolf. He captures the Kingslayer in a wood at night. Tywin Lannister, who does not hand out compliments, is openly rattled by him. He wins everything, and he loses completely. And he does it entirely with his mouth and his heart rather than his sword, which I think makes him the most interesting entry on tonight's list. Let's do the marriage first because that's the famous one, and it deserves to be handled properly rather than just laughed at. The situation: Robb needs to cross the Green Fork. The only crossing is the twins. The twins belong to Walder Frey, who is old, rich, spiteful, and has approximately 4,000 descendants he needs to place. Catelyn negotiates the crossing, and the price is a marriage. Robb will marry one of Walder's daughters. Robb agrees, he gives his word, and then he meets Talisa and marries her instead. Now look, I get it. Everyone gets it. That's the whole point of the scene. But the thing people gloss over is what the promise actually was. Robb didn't promise to like Walder's daughter. He didn't promise to be happy. He promised a political alliance in exchange for the thing that let him fight the war at all. And then he took the crossing, used it, won several battles with it, and then declined to pay. The world histories are unusually blunt about the consequence. Robb Stark realises that due to his various political blunders, he has functionally lost the war already. That's not a fan's opinion. That's just what the record says. He worked it out himself, sat in a tent with a map, and understood. Because it's not just a phrase, and this is the part people skate past. It's the Freys and the Karstarks, and the Karstarks are the one people forget. Rickard Karstark loses 2 sons in the war. Grief-mad, he breaks into the cells at Riverrun and murders 2 unarmed Lannister squires, Martin and Willem, who are boys and who happen to be Tywin's own nephews. And Robb, who has just spent months trying to secure a prisoner exchange, executes him for it. Which is correct. Legally, morally, completely correct. Karstark murdered children under Robb's protection, and the punishment for that is death. And Robb does it himself, because that's what his father taught him. And the Karstark army, several hundred men, a substantial chunk of an already outnumbered force, packs up and goes home. Every single one of them. Robb applies the law correctly, and it costs him the war. Catelyn tells him not to. Edmure tells him not to. Everyone in that room can see the arithmetic. Robb sees it too. He just can't do the other thing. There's a callback here to his father that I'll make once and leave alone, because you can see exactly where it comes from. Same disease, different symptom. And I want to be honest here, because I go back and forth on this one. There is a version of Robb who imprisons Karstark, wins the war, and executes him afterwards. That version is a better commander and a worse man, and I'm not entirely sure the show thinks the trade is worth it. I'm not entirely sure I do either, but the Karstarks still leave, and the maths is the maths. Then there's Jaime, which is Catelyn's decision, but Robb wears it. She lets the single, most valuable hostage in the war walk out of the camp with Brienne of Tarth in the middle of the night without telling anybody, in exchange for a hope that Cersei might trade her daughters back. Robb puts his own mother under guard for it. Correct call again, and the Northern Lords still look at him differently afterwards, because a king who can't control his own mother is a king with a problem. So by the time we get to the twins, the position is this. He's lost the Freys, he's lost the Karstarks, Winterfell has burned, his brothers are presumed dead, and his remaining plan is to march west and take Casterly Rock, which he cannot do without the Frey soldiers he insulted, so he goes back, hat in hand, and Walder's price is that Edmure Tully marries Rosalind Frey instead. Which Edmure does, under protest, and Rosalind turns out to be lovely, which is a nice bit of cruelty on the show's part. And then Robb walks into the twins. I want to make a case for Robb here, because I don't think he was stupid to go. Guest right is real. It's not a courtesy. It's not a nice tradition. In this world, it's a sacred law with actual metaphysical weight behind it. And it's been honoured for thousands of years by people far worse than Walder Frey. Bread and salt. Once you've eaten under a man's roof, he cannot harm you, and everybody knows it, and everybody has always known it. And in the entire recorded history of Westeros, the number of people who've broken it and prospered is essentially 0. Robb wasn't being naive. He was trusting a rule that had held for thousands of years. He just happened to be dealing with the one man who decided he didn't believe in it anymore. That's a specific and interesting kind of wrong, and it's not the same as being an idiot. Though I'll say this, Catelyn spots it. That's the detail that haunts me. She notices Black Walder closing the doors. She notices the musicians in the gallery starting up the Rains of Castamere, which is a Lannister song, at a Stark wedding in a Frey castle. And then she reaches over and touches Rose Bolton's sleeve and feels mail under his clothes. Mail. At a wedding feast. The man is wearing armour to a party, and she's the only person in the entire hall who thought to check. She grabs his arm and screams a warning, and it's already far too late. Lothar's got a knife in Talisa. The crossbows are already up, and afterwards they cut off Robb's head and sew grey winds on in its place and parade him round the yard, chanting King in the north while the Freys laugh. Which, I don't know. I don't have a joke for that one. Undefeated, never lost a battle, killed at a wedding by a man he was apologising to. But he wasn't the only one of that generation to make a mess of things. So let's talk about the boy who was supposed to be his brother. There's a fork in the road for Theon Greyjoy, and I want to sit at it for a minute, because I think it's the single most misunderstood decision in the show. Robb sends him to Pike, that's the setup, Robb has won a string of battles, he's been declared king in the north, and he needs ships because the Lannisters have a fleet and he doesn't. So he sends Theon, his best friend, his sworn brother in all but name, the boy he grew up with, home to Balon Greyjoy to negotiate an alliance. Robb's offer is generous to the point of embarrassment. Balon gets a crown. The Iron Islands get independence. All he has to do is sail his ships south and hit the Lannisters from the sea. Theon takes that offer home, and Balon rips it up in front of him, slaps him, tells him he dresses like a whore, and informs him that the Ironborn don't take, they don't ask, they pay the iron price. And then he gives Theon one ship, 30 men. And he gives Yara, who Theon had not seen since he was taken hostage, 30 ships and the entire Western campaign. So Theon chooses his father. And I want to be really clear about the maths here, because when you lay it out, it's almost funny. On one side, a crown, a kingdom, and the friendship of a man who genuinely loves him. On the other, 30 men, a fishing boat, and open contempt from a father who considers him a Stark in a bad coat. Theon looks at those two offers and picks the second one, which is insane, and which I completely understand. And that's the whole tragedy of him. Because Theon isn't choosing between two political alliances. He's choosing between two fathers. He's been a hostage at Winterfell since he was 9 years old. Ned Stark raised him, fed him, taught him, and also, and this is the part people forget, kept a headsman's block in the yard and let Theon know exactly why he was there. Ned was kind to him, and Ned would have killed him without hesitation if Balon had rebelled again. Theon grew up in a house where he was loved conditionally and reminded of it daily, so when a chance comes along to be an actual son to an actual father, he takes it. Even though the father is a monster. Even though the offer is worse in every measurable way. It's not a strategic decision at all. It's a boy trying to belong somewhere, and every single thing that happens to him afterwards comes out of that. Then he takes Winterfell, and this is the properly mad part. The plan is Dagmar's mostly. Theon raids Torrhen Square to draw Sir Roderick Castle and 200 men out of Winterfell, and it works perfectly. Then he takes Winterfell itself, with about 20 men, because there's nobody left in it but boys and old men, and a crippled child. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's probably the best bit of soldiering anyone does that season. He's taken the ancestral seat of the North, with a force you could fit in a pub, and he's done it through a proper feint and a clean assault. And then he's standing in the yard with it. Because now what? He's got 20 men, in a castle, in the middle of a hostile continent, with an army of Northmen who love the Starks somewhere out there, and a father who isn't coming to help. He hasn't taken a fortress. He's climbed into a very well-appointed box and locked it from the inside. Yara actually turns up and tells him this to his face. She rides all that way to say, "You're in a castle you can't hold, in a country that hates you, 300 miles from the sea. Come home. Nobody will think less of you." And he says no, because going home means admitting the whole thing was a mistake. And he's already burned the only bridge he had. He kills Sir Roderick. That's the point of no return, and it's an awful scene, because Theon doesn't want to do it, and does it badly. Roderick is a captured knight who spits in his face, and Theon has to take 3 or 4 swings to get his head off. And Roderick was the man who taught him to hold a sword. The Ironborn watch him do it, and they still don't respect him. That's the cruelest part. He murders his own weapons master to impress 30 men who think he's a joke, and afterwards they still think he's a joke. Then the farm boys. He can't find Bran and Rickon, so he kills 2 orphan boys from a nearby farm, burns them beyond recognition, and hangs them up as Stark children to keep his authority. And it works, in that everyone believes it. And it means that for the rest of the story, half of Westeros thinks the Stark line is dead, which has consequences for years. Here's a detail from the histories that I think is properly grim though, and it complicates the whole thing. Winterfell burns. Everyone assumes Theon did it. He didn't. It was Ramsay Snow and his soldiers who burned Winterfell to the ground, and then flayed the 20 Ironborn, who'd surrendered under a promise of safe passage, and Rose simply sent false reports to Robb, blaming the Ironborn for the lot. So Theon gets framed for a fire he didn't set, on top of everything he actually did. The Boltons had been planning to betray the Starks for months before the Red Wedding, and they used Theon's mess as cover. And then, of course, he trusts Ramsay. Twice. The first time is understandable. Ramsay turns up as a rescuer, or seems to, and Theon's in no state to interrogate the offer. The second time is the one that breaks you. Theon has been in that dungeon for what feels like forever. Ramsay offers him escape. He runs, he's led in a circle, and he ends up back in the same room. And that's the moment where Ramsay properly takes him apart. There's a box, and there's a name. Balon reads the letter that comes with the box. His response is that Theon defied his orders, and Yara's common sense by staying at Winterfell, and that he can't further the Greyjoy line anyway, as the contents of the box demonstrate. That's his father. That's what he chose over a crown. Yara's the only one who comes. 50 men, and her fastest ship, all the way round Westeros to the Dread Fort, for a brother she barely knows, and who abandoned her family's ally to please a man who never once spoke well of him. I don't have a punchline for Theon. He's the one entry tonight where I don't really want one. Everyone else on this list is a powerful adult making a call. Theon's a boy who got handed 2 doors and picked the one with his father behind it, and it cost him roughly everything a person can be charged. Anyway, let's talk about someone who genuinely should have known better. I want to do this one backwards, because I think starting at the beginning is unfair to him, and starting at the end is more interesting. So let's start in Essos, on a beach watching a fleet burn. Tyrion Lannister is Hand of the Queen. He has the largest dragon force in 10,000 years, an army of Unsullied, a horde of Dothraki, the Greyjoy fleet, the Martells of Dorne, and the Tyrells of the Reach. He has, on paper, the most overwhelming military advantage anyone has ever assembled in Westeros. Cersei has a broke treasury, a disliked queen, and Jaime, and Tyrion's plan is to send the Unsullied all the way across the continent to take Casterly Rock, his own childhood home, a castle he knows intimately, which is exactly why he picks it, while the Dornish and the Tyrells besiege King's Landing, and every single element of it fails in exactly the way his enemies intended. The Unsullied take Casterly Rock beautifully. Grey Worm uses the sewers Tyrion designed. It's a lovely bit of work, and they arrive to find about 100 men defending it, because Jaime has taken the entire Lannister army west to Highgarden, where he sacks the Tyrells and takes their gold and marches it back to the capital before the Iron Bank can hear about any of it. Meanwhile, Euron burns the Greyjoy fleet at sea and takes the Dornish princesses. So in the space of 2 episodes, Tyrion loses the Reach, Dorne, and his navy and gains an empty castle 300 miles from anywhere, with no ships to leave it. Now hold that image because I want to rewind about 5 years. Blackwater Tyrion is one of the great characters in television. I'll fight anyone on this. He arrives in King's Landing as acting hand, with no allies, no soldiers, a sister who despises him, a nephew who wants him dead, and a city that's about to be attacked by a fleet of 200 ships. And he holds it, with nothing. He finds out about the wildfire because he notices Cersei's been having a lot of meetings with the Alchemists Guild and thinks that's odd, which is more curiosity than the entire small council has managed in living memory. He takes it off her. He works out that wildfire in the hands of panicking defenders will just burn their own city down, because he realises it himself and he actually listens, which is the single rarest skill in Westeros. So instead of catapulting it about at random, he puts it in one ship, floats it into the middle of Stannis' fleet, and has Bronn hit it with a flaming arrow. And then the chain. He'd had it built quietly weeks earlier, and nobody knew what it was for. Stannis' ships sail in over a submerged chain that's then raised behind them, and half the Baratheon fleet is locked in the bay while it's on fire. And then, when Joffrey runs away and the gold cloaks start to break, Tyrion, who is about 4'6", who has never fought anyone in his life, who has every possible reason to be somewhere else, puts on a helmet and leads a sortie out the sallyport with about a dozen men, and gets his face opened up for it and gets no credit, and Tywin rides in at the last moment and takes the whole thing. That's the same man. That's the point. That's what makes the later stuff so odd. So what's happened? I think it's Meereen. I think Meereen is where it goes. Tyrion arrives in a city in open insurgency, and his solution is to negotiate with the slavers. Give the masters 7 years to phase out slavery, in exchange for withdrawing support from the Sons of the Harpy. And he sits down with them and gives them wine and cracks jokes because that's his instrument. That's the thing he's always been able to do. Find the human being across the table and talk to them. And they take the deal and they use the time to build a fleet. And they sail it into the bay and start shelling the pyramid. Because they were never negotiating. They were buying time from a clever man who assumed that everyone at a table is at the table for the same reason he is. And that's Tyrion's actual failure mode, and it's the exact inverse of his father's. Ned couldn't imagine people being worse than him. Tyrion can't imagine people being simpler than him. He assumes everyone has a price, a want, a lever, a bit of self-interest he can find and pull because he's spent his whole life surviving by finding it. And when someone genuinely just wants to burn it all down, or genuinely just hates him, he has nothing. Which brings us to his family. Tyrion frees Jaime in Season 8, when Jaime's been caught trying to ride south to Cersei. He does it as a brother. He does it knowing it may cost him his own head, and he does it because he still, after everything, believes Jaime can be talked round, and Cersei can be reasoned with. And earlier, at the Dragon Pit, he'd staked the entire alliance on a conversation with Cersei. He went and spoke to her alone. He believed her. He walked out and told Daenerys the Lannister armies were coming, and when Jaime later tells him she was lying, Tyrion's response is that she's pregnant, and that a woman carrying a child will act differently. This is a man who has been personally, deliberately, endlessly abused by his sister since he was born. She tried to have him executed. She tried to have him killed during the chaos of the Blackwater. He shot their father with a crossbow specifically because of what that family did to him and to Shae. And he still, at the end, cannot get his head around the idea that they simply are what they appear to be. His father, of all people, saw it. Tywin's assessment of Tyrion is that he's a clever man who's never learned that cleverness isn't the same as judgment, dressed up in about 4 layers of cruelty. And it's uncomfortable how close to the mark it lands by the end. There's a fun detail I always come back to. Tyrion is the only major character who spends the entire series being underestimated, and he builds his entire identity around it. He tells Jon Snow to wear his difference like armour so it can never be used to hurt him. Brilliant advice, best line in Season 1, and then he spends 7 years underestimating other people. Cersei, the Masters, Euron, Littlefinger for ages. Daenerys right at the end, which is the one that costs the most. The man who built a philosophy out of being written off never quite noticed he'd started doing it to everyone else. And here's a lovely detail about the man who was arguably the cleverest operator in the entire story, and who still managed to end up face down on the floor with a knife in him. There's a stretch of rock on the eastern coast of the Vale called the Fingers. It's 4 narrow peninsulas of wet stone and sheep. It produces nothing anyone wants, and the whole of it could be walked in a day. That's where this man comes from, and I think you have to keep it in your head the entire time, because his career is genuinely astonishing, and it's worth saying so before I start pulling it apart. Peter Baelish starts with nothing. He's the son of the smallest lord in the Vale, from a stretch of rock called the Fingers, that's so poor and so unimportant that his family sigil is a joke, and his nickname is an insult about his height and his birthplace at the same time. No land worth having, no army, no name. in a world that is entirely about land, armies, and names. And he ends up Master of Coin, Lord Paramount of the Riverlands, Lord Protector of the Vale, and very nearly Warden of the North. He does it with brothels, ledgers, and a talent for being in the room when someone's upset. He also has the single best strategic understanding of anyone in the series. He's the only person who correctly identifies what the game actually is. Everyone else thinks it's about armies, Varys thinks it's about the realm. Littlefinger works out that it's about chaos, and that if you're the only person who knows which lies you told, you're the only person who can predict what happens next. He starts the entire war with a whisper about a dagger. That's it. That's the whole engine. He tells Catelyn the knife belonged to Tyrion, and 6 years later, there's a wight coming through the wall. So what goes wrong? Sansa. He sells Sansa to Ramsay Bolton. That's the one. That's the decision that ends him, and it ends him about 3 seasons before he actually dies. Everything after it is just the paperwork. And I've thought about this a lot because there are only 2 possible readings, and they're both bad. Either he knew what Ramsay was and did it anyway, which means he handed the one person he claimed to love to a torturer in exchange for a title. Or he didn't know, which for the realm's spy master, for the man who runs a network of whores and informants specifically designed to know things, is somehow worse. He's the man who knows everything. That's his entire product. And he put a teenage girl in a marriage bed at Winterfell, and apparently didn't do the basic due diligence that would have taken one conversation with anyone who'd ever been to the north. Sansa asks him afterwards, "Did you know?" And he does that thing where he doesn't answer. Either way, it's the end of him, because it's the moment Sansa stops being a thing he's shaping and starts being a person with a memory. And it's not his only unforced error. He kills Lysa Arryn in front of a witness. Think about that for a second. He's just married her. He's just secured the Vale. He's got everything he came for, and he pushes her through the moon door in front of Sansa Stark, who is standing right there, and whose testimony is the only thing between him and an execution. His entire subsequent position in the Vale depends on a 15-year-old girl choosing to lie for him at the inquest. She does, but he didn't know she would when he pushed. He'd made his safety contingent on the goodwill of a child he'd just terrified. But the real one, the one I actually cannot explain, is that he stays. He had it. That's the maddening part. By the time we get to the last season at Winterfell, Petyr Baelish is Lord Protector of the Vale, commander of a fresh army that has just won the Battle of the Bastards for the Starks, and Lord Paramount of the Riverlands. He has a horse. He has a castle in the mountains that is literally impregnable. He has more actual power than he's ever had in his life, and he's achieved it all from nothing, and every single person who could testify against him is dead. And he stays at Winterfell to run a long con on 2 teenage girls, one of whom he mentored personally, so she knows every move he's got, and one of whom is a professional assassin trained in Bravos by a death cult. And their brother is psychic. Actually psychic. Sitting in the courtyard, able to see any moment in history, including all the moments Littlefinger has spent his entire life making sure nobody saw. Bran tells him straight out, chaos is a ladder, in his own words back at him, and Littlefinger's face does something I've never quite seen an actor do before, and he still doesn't leave. There's a moment earlier that I find quietly perfect. Jon's holding court in that same hall, forgiving the Umbers and Karstarks, and Sansa's arguing with him about it in front of everyone, and the camera cuts to Littlefinger, watching. And he's smiling. He's absolutely delighted. He thinks he's watching a crack form between a brother and a sister, and he's already working out where to put the wedge. He isn't. He's watching 2 people who've both spent time in King's Landing, and both survived it, having a disagreement about policy in front of their lords, and then sorting it out privately about 90 seconds later. He's reading a room in a language he no longer speaks. He built his entire career on King's Landing rules, where everyone is a rival, where families leverage, where nobody has anyone, and then took those rules 800 miles north into a house where people actually do love each other. And the last thing he ever says is a plea. He's in that same hall in front of the assembled lords of the North and the Vale, and Sansa reads out the charges, and he realises, about 4 seconds too late, that this is not a trial he's been invited to observe. He tries Lord Royce, and Royce won't move. Varys convinces Eddard to take the black. He gets on his knees and starts talking about how much he loved Catelyn, and how he loves Sansa like his own daughter. And it's the only moment in 7 years where the words aren't doing anything at all. And then Arya cuts his throat with the dagger the whole thing started with. His last mistake is the same as his first. He assumed everyone was playing his game. Since we're on the subject of people who overestimated their read on a room, let's go across the narrow sea. There's a gap in the middle of Daenerys Targaryen's story, and everything that goes wrong with her falls into it. The gap is this. She is, without question, one of the great liberators in fiction. She walks into cities that have been built entirely on the buying and selling of human beings, and she takes them apart. That's not a small thing, and I don't want to be flippant about it, because it's genuinely the moral centre of her whole arc, and it's why people loved her. And she has, at no point, in any city in 8 years, the faintest idea what to do on the following Tuesday. That's it. That's the whole thing. Liberation is an event. Governing is a job. And Daenerys is extraordinary at events. Let's do Astapor, because Astapor is the best thing she ever does, and it demonstrates the problem perfectly. She turns up with nothing. 3 dragons the size of dogs, a handful of Dothraki, no money, no ships. And she works out that the good masters will trade 8,000 Unsullied for Drogon, and she makes the trade, and she takes the whip. And the moment the whip is in her hand, she tells the Unsullied to kill every master in the city, and she tells Drogon to burn Krasnys alive. It's brilliant. It's genuinely one of the most satisfying scenes in television. She's outplayed a Slava economy, using the one asset they couldn't imagine understanding her language. And then she leaves. She tells Astapor's freed slaves to choose their own leaders, to be their own masters, and marches on Yunkai and Astapor's subsequent fate, including who rules it or what happens to the master's children, is never shown. The city she liberated collapses into a worse tyranny within months. Not because her intentions were bad, but because she removed the entire administrative class of a city in an afternoon and then walked away with the only army capable of holding it. Then Meereen. And Meereen is where she starts making calls that I struggle with. The 163 masters. On the road to Meereen, she finds 163 slave children crucified along the mileposts, one every mile, pointing the way to the city as a message. And when she takes Meereen, she has 163 masters crucified in reply. No trial, no selection, just a number matched to a number. Now the impulse is completely comprehensible. I don't think there's a person watching who doesn't feel something when she says it. But as a policy, it's indefensible, and the show knows it, because it comes back to her later. There's a man who comes to petition her, whose father was one of the 163, and who tells her his father argued against the crucifixions and was overruled and got nailed up anyway. Barristan tries to tell her. He tells her about her own father, about how it starts, about what it looks like from outside when a Targaryen decides that a large gesture is the same thing as justice. She answers a cruelty with a symmetrical cruelty and calls it balance. It isn't. It's the same thing with better branding. And then the catacombs. This one I find almost physically painful. Drogon eats a child, a little girl in a field outside the city, and a farmer brings her bones in a bundle and lays them at her feet. And Daenerys, devastated, chains Rhaegal and Viserion in the catacombs beneath the pyramid, in the dark, because she can't control them. So she voluntarily removes from the board the one asset in the world that nobody can counter. She's ruling a hostile city in open insurgency, funded by people who want her dead, and her response to a crisis is to lock up her air force for seasons. And they don't get better down there. They get feral and small and frightened, and when Tyrion goes down to unchain them, he's basically dealing with two traumatized animals who've forgotten who anyone is. I understand why she does it. It's the most human thing she does all season. But she's the mother of dragons, and her solution to a dragon problem is abasement. Then the marriage. Hisdar zo Lorak, a Myronese noble, possibly funding the Sons of the Harpy, possibly not. Nobody can tell, including her. She marries him for stability. She reopens the fighting pits for stability. She's governing a city whose language she can't speak, through advisors she can't verify, against an insurgency she can't identify, and every single compromise she makes buys her about 11 days. And it ends in the pit, with knives coming out of the crowd, and Drogon showing up to fly her out of it, and her waking up on a hillside surrounded by Dothraki who have no idea who she is. Right. So, Westeros. And here's where I get properly interesting about her, I think, because the standard reading is that she's impatient and it destroys her. And I don't think that's what the show does at all. I think it's the opposite. She arrives at Dragonstone with everything. 3 grown dragons, the Unsullied, 100,000 Dothraki, the Greyjoys, Dorne, the Reach. And she asks Tyrion what to do, and Tyrion tells her to wait. Don't burn the cities. Don't be the foreign conqueror the propaganda says you are. Do it properly, do it politically, and Westeros will come to you. So she waits. And in the time she spends waiting, Euron destroys her fleet. Jaime takes Highgarden. The Tarleys wipe out her Dornish allies, and by the time she finally does anything, her overwhelming advantage has evaporated. Her hand's cautious, decent, humane advice has cost her roughly half of everything she brought. And then she does use the dragons once on the loot train against an army in the open field, which is, militarily, a devastating success, and also the scene the show frames as the moment we're supposed to get worried. That's what I mean. She's the only major character whose worst outcomes come from doing what she was told. Every advisor she trusted in Essos told her to be patient, and she was. And Astapor burned. Every advisor she trusted in Westeros told her to be patient, and she was, and she lost the Reach. There's a genuine argument that Westeros taught her exactly the wrong lesson, which is that restraint costs you and fireworks. The White Hunt I'm going to leave alone for now, because it deserves its own chapter, and we'll get there. But the last stretch, and I want to be careful here, because I'm not interested in relitigating the writing tonight. Plenty of people have done that, and done it better than I would, at 1 a.m. I'm interested in the decisions themselves, with the information the character had, refusing to rest the armies. She arrives at Winterfell with Dothraki and Unsullied, who have crossed an ocean and a continent, and Sansa asks the perfectly reasonable question of how they're going to feed them all, through a winter, and Daenerys treats it as an insult rather than a logistics question. Which, to be fair, it was slightly both, but she's landed 100,000 horsemen in the least food-secure region of Westeros in the first month of a winter that everyone's been warning about since episode 1, and her plan for provisioning them is that she's the queen, flying Rhaegal over open water. This is the one I genuinely can't get round. Euron has already destroyed one of her fleets. He's done it once, and she flies 2 dragons in a straight line at low altitude past Dragonstone and gets Rhaegal shot out of the sky by a scorpion at 400 yards, and it takes her about 90 seconds to work out from where. And then the bells, which, look, the bells are the bells. I've made peace with them in the sense that I understand what they were reaching for. She's been in Westeros for a year, and it has taken from her in order her fleet, her allies, her closest friend, 2 of her 3 children, and her claim, and it has given her nothing except a roomful of northern lords who look at her like a problem to be managed. She rings the city, and the city rings back, and she chooses. The decision I actually find worth talking about isn't the burning, It's the sitting, because there's a stretch before all of it where the strategically correct move is the one she's been talking herself out of for 8 years. Fly to King's Landing, burn the Red Keep, one castle one afternoon, and Cersei's dead and nobody else is. Everyone tells her not to. Tyrion tells her not to, and she listens every time, and every time it costs her more. And by the time she stops listening, the thing she does is a great deal worse than the thing she was talked out of. Anyway, a lot of what happened to her traces back to one specific trip north, and that trip honestly deserves a chapter to itself. So let's do that. I'd like to walk through this one step by step, calmly, in the order it happens, because I think the only way to properly appreciate it is to lay it out like a plan on a whiteboard. The problem? Cersei Lannister will not commit her armies to the fight against the dead. The dead are coming. The North cannot hold the wall alone. The proposed solution? Go north of the wall. Capture a white, alive, or whatever the word is. Bring it back across 700 miles of frozen wilderness, put it in a box, take it by ship to King's Landing, open the box in front of Cersei, and hope that she is persuaded by evidence. I want to isolate that last clause, because it's doing an enormous amount of work. The entire operation, every mile of it, every man on it, rests on the belief that Cersei Lannister is a person whose behaviour can be changed by facts. This is proposed by Tyrion, who has known her for 35 years. It's approved by Daenerys, who has never met her. It's carried out by Jon, who has not yet met her. Davos is there. Jorah's there. Not one person in that room says the obvious thing, which is that Cersei has never in her life been moved by information, and there is no reason to think a zombie will start now. Right, so, the team. Jon Snow, King in the North, the only person the Northern Lords will follow. Jorah Mormont, who's just been cured of grayscale and is Daenerys' most experienced military commander. Sandor Clegane, Beric Dondarrion, one of 2 men alive with a flaming sword, and more importantly, a working knowledge of what the dead actually are. Thoros of Myr, the priest who's been resurrecting Beric for years, and is therefore, arguably, the single most strategically important person in Westeros. Tormund Giantsbane, who commands the Free Folk, and is the only reason 100,000 wildlings are on their side at all. And Gendry, the last Baratheon, who they've had for about a week. Every single one of them is irreplaceable. There is not one redundant person on that expedition. If that group dies, the war against the dead is over before it starts, and they're all walking north together in one clump. Nobody suggests sending anyone else. There are, at that point, several thousand professional soldiers at Eastwatch. Not one of them is invited. Then the lake. They find a white. They grab it. It screams. And this is the detail I love, because it's a nice bit of world building. And the scream brings the entire army of the dead. Because of course it does. Because that's what a scream is for. So now they're on a rock in the middle of a frozen lake, surrounded by every dead thing in the world, and the ice is too thin for the dead to cross. Which buys them time. Excellent. And the plan for using that time is Gendry runs, on foot, back to Eastwatch. 7 miles, 20 miles, some number of miles in the snow, in armour, having never been north of the wall in his life. He gets there and collapses in the gate. Then a raven flies from Eastwatch to Dragonstone, which is the entire length of Westeros, top to bottom, over 1,000 miles. Then Daenerys reads it, gets up, and flies 3 dragons back up the entire length of Westeros to the same lake. And when she arrives, everyone is still standing on the rock, having had a chat, buried a friend, and got a bit cold. I'm not going to make a meal of this because the timeline thing is the most discussed problem in the show's entire run, and everyone's had their go. But I do think it's better to just cheerfully acknowledge it than to pretend it's fine. Time in that episode works like time in a dream. Things take exactly as long as the story needs, and no longer. And then the cost. The Night King picks up an ice spear and throws it, and Viserion drops out of the sky into the lake, and everybody watches. and then he raises him. That's the whole ball game right there. That's the single most consequential moment in the war against the dead, and it happens because a group of 7 men went for a walk. The Night King had been at the wall since before there was a wall. The wall is 800 feet of ice with magic in it. He had no way through, none. He'd been standing at Hardhome and at the Fist and at the wall itself, and the answer had always been no. And they flew him a dragon. He gets an air asset with the strength to bring down a magical barrier that has stood for 8 millennia, and he gets it because 7 men went north to fetch a corpse to show to a woman who was always going to lie. And she does lie. That's the punchline. They get the White to King's Landing. They open the box. It sprints at Cersei's face and Sandor cuts it in half, and both halves keep moving, and Qyburn picks up a hand and pokes it with a look of pure academic delight. And Cersei sees it, really sees it, close enough to smell, and agrees to send her armies north, and then tells Jaime in private, roughly 4 minutes later, that she was lying and she's going to let the dead and the living fight it out, and buy sellswords with the difference. So the final ledger on the White Hunt. Cost 1 dragon, several thousand years of defensive infrastructure, the entire wildling settlement at Eastwatch, and Thoros of Myr, which means Beric only has 1 life left. Benefit, a promise from Cersei Lannister, which she breaks before the ship's out of the bay. It's not the dumbest decision in the show because it's badly conceived. It's the dumbest because everyone involved had, right there in the room, all the information required to know it wouldn't work. Jaime knew, Tyrion knew, Davos definitely knew, and they all went, because the alternative was admitting there wasn't a plan. Right, let's go back a few years because I've been putting somebody off. I've been avoiding Jon a bit, if I'm honest, because he's my favourite, and it feels a bit like kicking a dog. But the man cannot keep a secret to save his life, and he's got the political instincts of a golden retriever. So here we are. Let's start with the wall because that's where the pattern sets. Jon becomes Lord Commander of the Night's Watch and immediately does the most strategically correct thing anyone does in the entire series. He goes to Hardhome, he brings the free folk south of the wall, and he settles them in the Gift. And it is right. It is completely, unambiguously right. Every wildling left north of the wall is a soldier for the Night King. Everyone he brings through is 1 fewer corpse in the enemy's army, and 1 more body in his own. The maths isn't close. It's the single best decision made by anybody in that entire war, and it gets him stabbed to death by his own men in a courtyard. Because Jon Snow, having conceived of a brilliant plan, made precisely 0 effort to sell it. He didn't build a coalition, he didn't work the room, he didn't sit down with Alliser Thorne, a man who had been fighting wildlings for 30 years, who had watched them kill his friends, who had a real and legitimate grievance, and make the case. He just announced it and expected the merit of the idea to carry it, because in his head, the merit of an idea is what makes people do things. That's the Ned thing again. I'll say it once and leave it. 3 generations, same instinct. And there's a bit of it that's worse than his father, actually, because Ned at least had a lifetime of relationships in the north to fall back on. Jon's been at Castle Black for about 2 years, half of which he spent living with the wildlings, and a decent chunk of the Watch already thinks he's a turncloak. He's the least credible possible messenger for that specific policy, and he doesn't do a single thing to shore it up. He doesn't promote allies, he doesn't isolate Thorne. He makes Thorne First Ranger, which is either an act of extraordinary grace or a complete failure to understand that giving your loudest opponent an operational command is not the same as winning him over. And Ollie. Poor Ollie, whose village got raided by the free folk, whose parents got killed in front of him, and who Jon keeps as his personal steward. He keeps him close, and only has 1 real conversation with him about it, just assumes it'll be fine, because the plan is correct. Then Janos Slynt, which I actually think is a good decision, executed at the worst possible time. Slynt refuses a direct order in front of the whole Watch, and Jon executes him for it, personally, with Longclaw. Right call. He genuinely had to, but he does it about 4 days after being elected, in front of a body of men who are already split about him. And he never does the second half of the job, which is the part where you go and speak to the 20 men who are Slint's friends. Ned would have understood that. Ned's whole thing was that the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Jon does the swinging bit brilliantly. He's never worked out that there's a bit afterwards. Right, the Battle of the Bastards, which is the one that makes me shout at the telly. Sansa tells him. That's what gets me. She sits with him the night before and tells him in plain words that Ramsay will use Rickon as bait, that Rickon is already dead, that he must not do the thing Ramsay wants him to do. She's one of the people in the north who's actually lived with Ramsay Bolton. She has direct personal expert knowledge of exactly how this man thinks, and she gives it to Jon for free. And the next morning, Ramsay walks Rickon out, cuts him loose, and starts shooting arrows at him. And Jon gets on a horse and rides out alone across open ground into the teeth of a cavalry army because a boy he hasn't seen in 6 years is running. And Rickon dies 4 feet from him, obviously, because Ramsay was never going to miss, because Ramsay had spent the whole morning setting it up. And then Jon stands there, alone, in the open, in front of the entire Bolton line, and his own army has to charge to save him, which destroys the defensive formation he'd spent all night planning, and about 5,000 men die in a crush because their commander went for a run. He wins. He wins because Littlefinger turns up with the veil, which is to say, he wins because of a man he doesn't like doing a thing he didn't ask for. His actual generalship in that battle is a catastrophe that gets bailed out at the last minute by cavalry he had no idea was coming. And then the secret. Oh, the secret. Sam and Bran work out that Jon is Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, legitimate heir to the Iron Throne. This is, at that moment, the single most explosive piece of information in the world. Jon's first move is to tell Daenerys, who is the one person in Westeros with a direct material interest in that information being false. His second move, after Daenerys explicitly begs him not to, after she tells him exactly what will happen, after he has already watched it start to happen, is to tell Sansa and Arya, in the crypt, under the noses of nobody, having sworn them to secrecy. Sansa tells Tyrion within about a day. Tyrion tells Varys. Varys starts writing letters to every great house in Westeros before the ink's dry. A secret with 100% leak rate at every single node. Every person he told someone. Every person they told someone. It's not even a chain, it's a broadcast. And I want to be fair here because Jon's reasoning isn't stupid. He tells them because they're his family, and because he spent his whole life being lied to about who he is, and he's decided he won't do that to anyone else. It's a moral position, and it's a coherent one. It's just that a moral position isn't a security protocol, and he keeps confusing the two. He does it with the bending of the knee too. He goes to Dragonstone with no leverage, gets talked into a white hunt, and comes back having pledged the North to a foreign queen without asking a single one of the lords who elected him. And when Sansa points out correctly that the Northern lords made him king, and he gave it away without a word to them, his answer is that he did what he thought was right. And then Cersei asks him at the dragon pit, in front of everyone, at the exact moment the whole alliance depends on him, saying something vague, whether he's pledged to Daenerys, and every single person in that pit is silently begging him to lie. Tyrion's face is doing a small opera, and Jon says yes, out loud, because he'd sworn not to lie, and it never occurred to him that this might be the afternoon for an exception. That's the whole man in one syllable. He's the most decent person in the story, and he's spent his entire life failing to notice that decency and effectiveness are two different tools. And that brings us to the battle itself, which, look, I have opinions about this one. I want to do this one properly because it's the section I've been looking forward to, and also because there's actual scholarship on it, which delights me more than it probably should. There's a historian called Brett Devereaux who writes about ancient and medieval warfare, and he wrote a piece about the Dothraki charge specifically, and his summary of it is that this was the wrong charge, at the wrong time, by the wrong cavalry, in the wrong place, with the wrong tactics, in the wrong formation, and for the wrong reasons. Which is quite a lot of wrong for one scene, as he points out. And what I like about his take is that everyone on the internet had already worked out that the charge was daft. His contribution is explaining precisely why, from someone who actually knows how horses work. So let's walk it. The Dothraki are light cavalry. That's what they are. They're horse archers. Their entire military doctrine is mobility, ride up, shoot, ride away, never engage, wear the enemy down over hours or days until they break, and then chase them. They don't have heavy armour. They don't have lances. They're not shock cavalry. Their araks are curved slashing swords designed for cutting down men who are already running away, and they are deployed at Winterfell as heavy shock cavalry in a massed frontal charge, at night, into an enemy of unknown size and position, on ground they haven't scouted, with no reserve, no second wave, and no line of retreat. Every one of those is its own separate mistake, and they've stacked them. Take the darkness alone. Cavalry needs to see. Horses need to see. A horse will not run at full gallop into a wall of black, at the request of a man on its back. That's not stubbornness. That's an animal with a survival instinct doing its job. And more to the point, a charge is a thing you time. You aim it. You need to know where the enemy line is, how deep it is, and whether it's braced, because if you hit a braced formation with light cavalry, you don't break it, you just donate your horses to it. They cannot see anything. That's the entire point of the shot. Melisandre lights the araks. They ride off into the dark, and we watch the lights go out from a mile away, a few at a time, and then all at once. And it's a beautiful piece of filmmaking. It's one of the best images in the whole show. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but taken as a decision by living people, it means Daenerys and Jorah through the entire Dothraki nation, every one of them, the whole horde, an army that had crossed an ocean into an unscouted void, in one go, at the very start of the battle, before the enemy had even arrived at the field. Devereaux makes a point about why this happened that I think is the honest answer. The battle needed to be over quickly, because there were only 6 episodes left. A proper siege, every fighter from the north and the Vale, the Unsullied, the Dothraki, and 2 dragons would have taken a very long time to depict, and they didn't have the room. So the Dothraki get spent in 90 seconds to establish the stakes. It's a plot device, not a plan. Which is a fair criticism, and it's also, and I say this with love, completely useless if you're trying to enjoy the thing as a story about people. So let's carry on, as if they meant it. The trench. They dig a trench. Excellent. Fortification. Very sensible. They fill it with pitch and stakes, and the idea is that they light it and the dead can't cross, and the entire allied infantry, the Unsullied, the Northmen, the Vale Knights, is deployed outside it. Outside, on the far side, between the trench and the enemy. So the thing they built to protect themselves is now behind them, meaning it can't be lit until they've all come back through it, meaning it cannot be used until after the battle has already gone badly enough that everyone's running, which is exactly what happens. They light it late, in a panic with Melisandre, and it works, and it holds for a while, and then the dead simply pile their own bodies into it until the fire's out and walk across the ramp made of their friends, which is a genuinely brilliant bit of horror, and also something you'd think you'd wargame in advance, given they'd all watched the dead do exactly this sort of thing at Hardhome. The catapults, they put the trebuchets in front of the infantry, in front, the single most valuable and least mobile assets on the field, with no protection, positioned closest to an enemy that outnumbers them 100 to 1. They fire once, one volley into the dark, at nothing in particular, and then they were overrun and never mentioned again. Artillery goes behind the line. That's not a medieval warfare hot take. That's the whole reason artillery exists. And then the crypts. Right, the crypts. They put the women, the children, the elderly, and the wounded in the crypts, which are, for anyone who's forgotten, the room full of dead Starks. Generations of dead Starks. Stone tombs, in Ross, going back further than the wall. To hide from the man whose entire and only supernatural ability is raising the dead. I've watched that scene a dozen times, and I still don't know what to do with my face. Somebody said, "The crypts" out loud, in a war council, in front of Jon Snow, Daenerys Targaryen, Tyrion Lannister, Davos Seaworth, Jorah Mormont, Sansa Stark, Brienne of Tarth, Jaime Lannister, and Bran Stark, who is psychic. And not one of those people said, hang on. They're not even wrong about it being the safest structural location. It probably is. It's just that the specific threat is reanimation, and they've chosen the reanimation cupboard. And then the plan itself, which I find more interesting than any of the rest of it. The plan is, put Bran in the Godswood as bait. Bran, who is the three-eyed raven who holds the entire memory of the world, whose death is the Night King's stated objective. Sit him in a chair in a tree grove under an open sky with Theon Greyjoy and about a dozen Ironborn archers as his entire security detail, and wait for the Night King to come and get him. The theory being that the Night King will come personally, and when he does, Jon will be there on a dragon, and that will be that. And it half works, which is what makes it maddening. The Night King does come, he does land, and then Jon gets pinned behind a wall of whites by an undead dragon and can't get to the Godswood. And the plan, the entire plan, the thing they staked the survival of every living thing on, has failed completely. And the war is won by Arya Stark, who was not part of the plan, who had not been briefed, who had spent the battle improvising through a library, who nobody had assigned to anything. The winning move in the war against the dead was made by the one person in the castle without a job. And look, I love it. I stood up. I'm not immune to it. But as a piece of planning, it means the coalition of every living thing in Westeros went into the most important battle in the history of the world with a strategy that had one point of failure, no contingency, and a fallback that consisted of a teenage girl having a good idea unprompted. I'll say this for the episode though, and I mean it sincerely. Miguel Sapochnik shot the hell out of that thing. The crew did an ungodly amount of work. The snowstorm the walkers conjure to blind the dragons is a genuinely clever bit of writing. Two armies each neutralising the other's advantage. The flaming barricade is gorgeous. As pure spectacle, it's something to behold, and I'd defend it against most things. The decisions inside it are still baffling. Both of those things get to be true at once, and I think insisting on only one of them is how people end up shouting at each other on the internet at 2 a.m. Now let's talk about the other side of that battle, because the Night King wasn't exactly covering himself in glory either. Here's a thing I like doing, which is turning the whole thing round and having a go at the villain for a bit. Because everyone spends ages tearing into the living for how they handled that battle, and almost nobody points out that the Night King had an entire age of uninterrupted preparation time and still managed to lose in one night to a 16-year-old with a dagger. Let's start with the timing. The histories are precise about it. After the passing of 8,000 years, the White Walkers emerge from the haunted forest with their massive army of the dead. That's the gap. That's how long he waited, and he picks this winter. Not the winter where the wall was manned by 1,000 black brothers and the north was quiet. Not any of the roughly 400 winters where nobody in Westeros could have told you what dragonglass does. He picks the one specific season in which dragonglass has just been rediscovered. There are 3 dragons alive for the first time in a century and a half. Valyrian steel has been identified as a weapon against him. and there is a Braavosi-trained assassin sitting in the target castle. I appreciate that from his side, the wall coming down was the constraint. Fine, but he'd been standing at that wall for millennia, with an army that doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, doesn't age, and doesn't get bored, and the one moment he chose to move was the moment the living had, by an enormous margin, the best anti-walker toolkit they'd ever assembled. Patience is his only advantage, and he spent it badly. Then the dragon. He gets Viserion. He raises him. He now has, for the first time in his existence, an air asset, a flying weapon that breathes something that takes down an 800-foot magical wall in about 4 minutes. And he uses it on a wall, which, yes, he needed to get through. And then think about what he's got afterwards. He's got the ability to fly over any castle in Westeros. He could fly Viserion to Winterfell alone at midnight and kill Bran in about 90 seconds without deploying a single wight. Bran is sitting in an open-air garden. There is no roof. The most heavily defended thing in the north is a boy in a chair under the sky, and the Night King has a dragon. Instead, he flies him to the battle, uses him as a strafing platform for a bit, gets knocked off him by Drogon, and then lands and walks. And then he walks into the Godswood personally. This is the one. This is the whole thing. The Night King has built an army with a single point of failure. That's a design choice. Kill him, and every wight and every walker drops at once. The whole thing collapses instantly. All of it. Millions of corpses, an age of work, tied to one man's heartbeat. So the single most important operational principle in his entire existence should be, do not be within 100 miles of anybody who might be able to hurt me. And he strolls into a tree grove, in person, on foot at night, with about 6 white walkers arranged neatly around him, who are also each a load-bearing node in the same structure, incidentally, to look a paralysed teenager in the eye and smirk at him before killing him. He walks his entire command structure into one small garden and stands still in it, and Arya vaults off a pile of dead whites. Which again, I loved it. The Melisandre line, the blue eyes, the whole thing. It's a great moment, but strategically, the man engineered an army that dies if he dies, and then went for a personal walk into the one location in Westeros he had specifically told everyone he was going to visit. He announced the target. He announced the method. He turned up in person. He did it slowly, savouring it, giving somebody a window. There's no dialogue for him, mind. Not a word in 8 seasons. And I think that's actually why he works. As well as he does, the silence is the whole character. And the second you give something like that a monologue, it becomes a bloke in makeup. Vlad Furdik does an enormous amount with a look and a smirk. But as a commander, he was a disaster. And I don't think anyone's ever going to say that to him. Now, since we've been talking about people repeating history all night, it's worth going back a good deal further than any of this, because none of it started with Ned. This is the slow bit. This is where we just sit down and talk about history for a while, because the whole story we've spent the night on is a sequel, and the first film is arguably better. Everything in Game of Thrones, Ned, Robert, Cersei, the wildfire, the wall, all of it, comes out of one 17-year-old boy and one married man deciding they'd rather be together than not. Let's set the scene properly. Aerys II, the Mad King, has been on the throne for about 20 years. He didn't start mad. People skip that. He started as a charming, ambitious young king with big ideas, canals, cities, reforms, and somewhere in the middle of it, he came apart. Defiance at Duskendale is usually where people point. He got taken hostage by a rebellious lord, spent 6 months in a cell expecting to be killed every hour, and Barristan Selmy climbed the walls and got him out, and the man who came back was not the man who went in. Afterwards, he wouldn't cut his hair or his nails because he wouldn't let a blade near him. His fingernails grew into these long yellow things. He kept cutting himself on the Iron Throne, which is a detail I've always liked, because the chair was basically disagreeing with him. And he liked fire, that's the important bit. He liked burning people, and he liked watching And he had the Alchemists' Guild making wildfire in industrial quantities and stacking it in caches under the city. Under the Sept, under the guild halls, under Flea Bottom, where his own subjects lived. Now, Rhaegar Targaryen is, by universal account, the best man of his generation. Everyone says so. Barristan says so, and Barristan doesn't like anyone. He's beautiful. He's melancholy, he plays the harp and makes women cry in the street. He reads obsessively, and he's married to Elia Martell of Dawn, and they have 2 children, Rhaenys and Aegon. He's also, quietly, planning to remove his father from the throne, because he's not blind, and he can see what's happening. And at the tourney at Harrenhal, the biggest tournament ever held, hundreds of knights, the whole realm, in one field, Rhaegar wins. And he rides past his own wife, who is sitting right there, and he lays a crown of blue winter roses in the lap of Lyanna Stark. Lyanna is 16. She is betrothed to Robert Baratheon. Her father is the Warden of the North. Her brother Brandon is heir to Winterfell. And the Crown Prince of the 7 Kingdoms has just publicly, in front of everyone, named her the Queen of Love and Beauty in preference to his Dornish wife, whose family commands 50,000 spears and whose brother is standing about 4 feet away. The whole field goes silent. That's the description that's always stuck with me. Hundreds of people, and nobody says a word because everybody in that meadow can do the sum. And then, some months later, they go. Whatever you think happened, abduction, elopement, prophecy, love, some combination of all 4, Rhaegar and Lyanna leave and end up in a tower in Dorne, and the realm catches fire. Right, so here's where the dumb decisions start stacking, and they stack fast. Brandon Stark rides to King's Landing, not to the small council, not to a magistrate. He gallops up to the Red Keep with a handful of companions and shouts at the gates for Rhaegar Targaryen to come out and die. Now. Brandon is the heir to the north. He's a grown man. He's about to marry Catelyn Tully, which secures the Riverlands. And his approach to a diplomatic incident involving the Crown Prince is to arrive at the seat of a paranoid king who is famously afraid of assassination and demand a member of the royal family come out and be killed. Aerys arrests him, obviously, and then Aerys summons Rickard Stark, Brandon's father, to answer for his son's treason. And Rickard comes. That's the one that gets me. Rickard Stark, Warden of the North, a serious man, a careful man, receives a summons from a king who is openly and famously insane and who is currently holding his eldest son in a cell, and he rides south to answer it. Because that's what you do. Because a lord answers his king's summons. Because the law is the law. There's the family disease again. Same instinct, 1 generation earlier. I'd said it was 3 generations and I was undercounting. And Rickard demands trial by combat, which is his right. And Aerys agrees, and then names fire as the champion of House Targaryen. Which isn't a champion, it's a brazier. They put Rickard in his armour and hang him over it. And they make Brandon watch from a device that tightens on his own throat the harder he pulls against it. And the whole court is in the room for all of it. So that's the fire. That's the thing everyone in this story spends the next 20 years running from, and I'm not going to dwell on it, because there's a fair bit of ground left and none of it improves. Then Aerys, having just murdered the Warden of the North and his heir, writes to Jon Arryn, who is fostering both Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon at the Eyrie, and demands their heads as well. Think about the shape of that. He has just annihilated one great house's leadership. The 2 young men left are the new Lord of Winterfell and the Lord of Storm's End, and they are living in the same castle as the Lord of the Vale, who raised them both as sons. And Aerys's move is to ask that man to send him their heads in a box. Jon Arryn calls his banners instead. And there it is. That single letter turns a Stark grievance into a rebellion of 3 of the 7 kingdoms in an afternoon. if Aerys does literally nothing, if he sits still and says not a word. Ned Stark is an isolated young lord with a grudge and no allies. Instead, the Mad King personally recruits the coalition that destroys him. And then the Trident. Rhaegar comes back. He'd been off in Dorne this whole time while his father cooked people, and he returns and he takes command of the Royalist army, and he rides out to meet Robert at the Ruby Ford. And this is the bit I find genuinely tragic. Rhaegar is fighting for his father, the man he was planning to depose. He's putting on armour and leading an army to defend the reign of a king he privately agreed needed removing, against a rebellion that was caused, in large part, by his own decision to run off with a 16-year-old. He wears armour with rubies on it. He fights Robert in a river, and Robert, who is a very large man with a warhammer and a personal reason, caves his chest in, and the rubies come off and scatter downstream, which is why they call it the Ruby Ford. And Barristan says afterwards that Rhaegar seemed distracted, that he was thinking about something else. Prophecy, probably. That's the running joke that isn't a joke. The House of Targaryen has been reading the future for 300 years and getting the present catastrophically wrong the entire time. And then the sack, which is Tywin, and which is exactly as calculated as everything Tywin does. He sits out the entire war, 12,000 men doing nothing, waiting to see who wins. And when it's decided, he brings them to the gates of King's Landing and says he's come to defend the city. And Aerys, against the advice of Varys, who tells him plainly not to, opens the gates for him. Grand Maester Pycelle tells him to. That's a nice bit of texture. The Crown's most trusted advisor was a Lannister asset for decades, and nobody ever once checked. And the Mountain kills Elia and her children, and Tywin has the bodies wrapped in Lannister cloaks and laid at Robert's feet as a gift. And Robert says nothing, and that silence is what makes Dorne an enemy for a generation, and what eventually gets Myrcella killed in Dorne. And Jaime, Aerys' last order, with Tywin's men in the streets and the city already gone, is to burn it. All of it. The caches under the sept, under Flea Bottom, everywhere. 500,000 people. He tells Jaime to bring him his father's head, and he tells the pyromancer to light the lot because if he can't have the city, nobody can, and because he'd rather be a king of ash than not a king. So Jaime kills the pyromancer, and then he kills Aerys, and he sits down on the throne to wait. And Ned Stark walks in and finds him there, and never asks him a single question about it. Not one. Ned Stark, who spent an entire season correctly solving a murder mystery nobody else could solve, looked at a man sitting on a throne next to a dead king and simply decided he knew what he was looking at, and never revisited it once for the rest of his life. Jaime broke the most sacred oath in the world to stop that fire, and wore the name for 2 decades rather than explain himself, largely because the first person to see him didn't ask, and the caches sat there. That's the fun detail I want to end on. Nobody dug them up, nobody thought to. 20 years of wildfire under the capital, quietly waiting, and we all know who eventually found it. Anyway, if you'd like to watch the same family make the same mistake with considerably better dragons, we should probably talk about the dance. The dance of the dragons starts by accident. I've never quite got over that. 2 teenagers in a thunderstorm over Storm's End. Lucerys Valerian flies to Storm's End on his little dragon arax to deliver a message from his mother, and finds Aemon Targaryen already there on Vhagar, who is the size of a small hill and about 180 years old, and remembers the conquest. And the Baratheons pick the other side, and Luke leaves, and Aemond follows him into the storm to frighten him. That's all he means to do. He says so. He wants to take an eye because Luke took his, and mostly he wants to make the boy wet himself. And Vhagar is not a horse. Vhagar is an ancient animal the size of a cathedral who has eaten men before and does not take direction from a 19-year-old with a grudge. And she turns and she takes Arax out of the air with Luke on him. And the pieces come down in the sea, and Aemon's face is the face of a boy who has just realised the thing he's sitting on isn't a vehicle. And that's the war. That's how it starts. Not a decision, not a plan. A boy showing off and losing control of something enormous, and 30,000 people die for it. Right, let's go back and do this properly, because there's a lovely thick layer of bad choices underneath. Viserys names Rhaenyra his heir. He does it publicly, formally, in front of the assembled lords of the realm. Valerion, Hightower, Stark, Baratheon, the lot, and they all kneel and swear. It's a real oath, sworn by real people, witnessed by the whole realm. And then Viserys has a son, and he does nothing about it for 20 years. That's the whole disaster, right there. 20 years. He doesn't disinherit Aegon, which would have been ruthless but clear. He doesn't marry Rhaenyra to Aegon, which would have been grim but which would have solved it entirely, and is exactly the sort of thing Targaryens do. He doesn't reaffirm the oath annually. He doesn't build a faction for her, doesn't secure the faith, doesn't win over the high towers he married into. He simply announces a decision and then spends 2 decades assuming the announcement will hold, because he said it, and he's the king, and saying it should be enough. He knows as well. That's what's so painful. There's a scene where he's drunk in a tent in the Kingswood, telling Alicent that he fears he made a mistake naming Rhaenyra, that his whole obsession with a prophesied son cost him Emma and his relationship with his daughter, and that now he's got a son. He wonders whether he was wrong to put Rhaenyra first. He's agonising, openly. He just never converts a single ounce of the agonising into an action. And the mummers know. There's a marvellous scene where Daemon takes Rhaenyra out into the city in disguise, and they watch a street play about the succession. The brother, the daughter, or the little princeling of 3, and the crowd is asked whether Rhaenyra will be a strong queen or a feeble one, and they all roar "feeble" and laugh. The lead mummer concludes that baby Aegon should be heir because he's got 2 things Rhaenyra hasn't got: a conqueror's name and, well, the commoners applaud, and Rhaenyra says she doesn't care what the small folk think. And Daemon tells her she'll have to if she means to rule them. That's the entire war, previewed in a puppet show about 15 years early, and both of them walk away from it and go and steal a pie. Then the terms. This one is my favourite because it's the last off-ramp, and they drive straight past it. Otto Hightower sails to Dragonstone with an offer. Rhaenyra publicly acknowledges Aegon as king, and in return she keeps Dragonstone. It passes to Jacaerys after her. Lucerys is confirmed as heir to Driftmark, and everything Valyrian, her sons by Daemon, get places of honour at court, and every lord who conspired with her gets a pardon. Now that is not a good offer. It's a humiliating offer. But it is an offer in which everyone she loves is alive at the end of it. And she has an island and a dragon, and her sons inherit the richest house in Westeros. And Daemon's response is that he'd sooner feed his sons to the dragons than have them carry cups and shields for Aegon, and he calls his nephew a drunken usurper, and the whole thing collapses in about 90 seconds because a middle-aged man couldn't stand the shape of the words. Rhaenyra almost takes it, is the thing. You can see her weighing it, and then Otto opens his mouth about old oaths not making her queen, and Daemon opens his about the cups, and that's 20,000 dead in the Riverlands, sorted, done, before lunch. Then Criston Cole and the head. The Greens win at Rook's Rest. It's a real victory. Rhaenys and Meleys are dead, which is enormous, because it's the first proof anyone's had that dragons can actually be killed by other dragons. And Criston Cole, Hand of the King, decides the correct use of this triumph is to drag Rhaenys' severed head through the streets of King's Landing on a cart. Through the streets, through the poor quarters, past the people whose houses aren't safe, whose food is running out, whose only reason to accept Targaryen rule for 130 years has been the unspoken deal that the family with the dragons is untouchable, and therefore the peace is real. And he shows them a dead one, rotting, on a wagon, being pulled by mules. Mysaria calls it exactly what it is, a terrible mistake, and she's right. And it's the moment the small folk of King's Landing start to work out that the family upstairs is mortal, and the arrangement might be negotiable. Everything that happens in that city afterwards, all of it, starts with a head on a cart and a hand who thought a parade was a policy. And underneath all of it is the thing that makes the dance the dance. Both sides had dragons. Both sides spent the first year of the war behaving as though only they did. Daemon sits on Dragonstone proposing they simply fly to King's Landing and burn it, and someone points out that the Greens have Vagar, and everyone goes quiet. The Greens sit in the Red Keep, knowing the Blacks have 6 dragons and several unclaimed ones sitting on a rock. Sea Smoke, Vermithor, Silverwing, plus 3 feral ones living wild, and behave as though the numbers don't apply to them. Both councils are full of men who have never fought a war, advising monarchs who have never fought a war about the deployment of weapons nobody has used in anger since the conquest. Rhaenyra says it out loud at one point, and it's my favourite line in the whole thing. She points out that she wasn't prepared to fight, that if she'd been a son, they'd have put a sword in her hand the moment she could stand, and instead they gave her her father's cup. She learned the name of every lord and castle between Storm's End and the Twins, and nobody ever taught her the difference between a shield and a spear, and they know it. That's the bit that stings. They all know it. I could do 3 hours on the dance alone, and I probably will at some point, if there's an appetite for it. There's a whole video in Vermithor and the Dragon Seeds. There's another one just in Larys Strong, who is the single strangest man in Westerosi history. But it's late, so let's start bringing this in. Right, this is the odds and ends bit. There's no theme here, and nothing's building to anything. So if you're mostly asleep, this is a good stretch to be mostly asleep through. Let's start with Euron, because Euron's a lovely bit of whiplash. The man arrives, kills his brother on a bridge, wins a king's moot, and then builds 1,000 ships out of a chain of islands with, by his own account, almost no trees, which is a whole other conversation. And then he takes those ships and he ambushes Yara's fleet at night in the open sea with total surprise and takes the sand snakes. And then he does it again to the Unsullied's transport fleet. And then he does it a third time to Daenerys directly and knocks a dragon out of the sky with a ballista from a moving ship at range in one shot. He is, on that evidence, the single most effective military commander in the entire series. 3 unanswered strategic victories in one season, all by ambush, all against numerically superior forces. And then in the last episode, he's standing on a beach and doesn't notice a dragon. Same dragon, the one he hadn't shot at. He's sitting on a ship in daylight with an entire battery of scorpions and every advantage he had the first time. And Drogon comes in low, and Euron's response is roughly the same as a man who's just seen a wasp. The Iron Fleet is gone in about 40 seconds, and then he washes up on a beach and stabs Jaime Lannister for the sheer joy of it and dies happy, which, I mean, at least he had a nice time. Then Bronn. I love Bronn. Bronn is my favourite person in Westeros, and I would like it on record that this is not a criticism of Bronn. This is a criticism of everyone around him. Bronn walks into a room where Tyrion and Jaime Lannister are having a private conversation, points a crossbow at both of them, and says he wants Highgarden, and they say yes. That's it. That's the negotiation. The 2 most senior surviving members of House Lannister, one of whom is Hand of the Queen, one of whom is Warden of the West, hand over the wealthiest castle in Westeros, the seat of a great house, the breadbasket of the entire continent, to a sellsword with a crossbow, because he asked in a slightly threatening manner. And then they honour it, that's the mad part. Afterwards, at the small council, in a room with Davos and Sam and Brienne and Tyrion, somebody says, Lord Bronn of the Blackwater, Lord of Highgarden, Lord Paramount of the Reach and Master of Coin, and everybody just nods along. Sam wants to know about the funding for a project, and Bronn's the one holding the purse. Bronn, who a decade earlier was doing knife work in an alley for coppers. Honestly, good for him. Best character arc in the show, but somebody should have said something. Then Sam in the crypt. This one bothers me more than it should. Sam learns that Jon is Rhaegar's son, legitimate, the heir to the Iron Throne, from a combination of a High Septon's diary and Bran, and he goes and finds Jon in the crypts, approximately 15 minutes later. He has had no time to think. He's just found out that Daenerys executed his father and his brother, and he's upset, and he takes the most destabilising secret in the world and hands it to a man he knows will feel obliged to act on it. And then he goes back to the library. That's his entire involvement. He detonates the succession of the Seven Kingdoms, and then he's basically a background character with a candle. Then the Citadel, which is my favourite institutional failure in the whole thing. The Citadel is the seat of all knowledge in Westeros. It's where every maester in every castle in the realm is trained. It is, functionally, the continent's entire scientific and historical establishment. And it has a network, every maester with a raven, in every keep, from the wall to dawn, that is genuinely the only real communications infrastructure in the world. And they receive word from the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch that the dead are walking and coming south. And they form a committee. They sit in a room and they discuss it. And Archmeister Ebros concludes that it's probably a bit of an exaggeration, and that the Watch has, historically, had a habit of dramatising things to secure funding, and that they'll look into it. They'll look into it. There's an army of ice zombies 800 miles north, and the world's only research institution decides it warrants further study at some later date. Sam steals the dragonglass information himself out of a restricted section at night. The single most important tactical fact in the war against the dead was sitting in a library that had it filed and catalogued and simply hadn't mentioned it to anyone. And the only reason it gets out is that a fat lad with a candle went looking through a shelf he wasn't allowed to touch. And they never do anything. That's the thing. The long night comes and goes, and the Citadel's contribution to the survival of the human species is one autodidact who wasn't supposed to be in that room. Then the Iron Bank, which I've got some sympathy for, but not much. The Iron Bank of Braavos funds everything. They fund Stannis, they fund Cersei, they fund the Golden Company. Their entire stated philosophy is that the Iron Bank will have its due, and that they don't care about kings, only about repayment. And their business model appears to be lending enormous sums to people who are actively at war with each other, in a way that makes the war longer, which makes repayment less likely. They fund Stannis' assault on King's Landing, while the Crown owes them millions. They then fund Cersei's sellswords after Cersei repays them with the money she got from sacking Highgarden. They're effectively laundering their own debt through a civil war and congratulating themselves on their rigour. Tycho Nestoris is unfailingly polite about all of it, which somehow makes it worse. Then Bran. And I'm going to be brief because I don't want to relitigate the whole thing at this hour. Bran spends 3 seasons telling everyone who'll listen that he isn't Bran anymore. That he's the three-eyed raven. That he doesn't want anything. That he can't want anything. That desire isn't a thing he does now. He says it to Mira. He says it to Sansa. He says it to Jon. He says it more or less to everyone he meets, usually while staring at a wall. And then Tyrion asks him if he'll be king, and he says, "Why do you think I came all this way?" Which is either the greatest villain reveal in television or a man forgetting his own bit. And I've never settled on which. And the Dragon Pit Council, which is where we should probably stop. Every surviving lord in Westeros gets in a pit to decide the future of the realm. And the process they arrive at, the constitutional mechanism, the thing they replace 300 years of hereditary monarchy with, is Tyrion asking who has the best story. That's the pitch. Not who's competent, not who's got the strongest claim, or the most support, or the largest army, or any experience whatsoever of administration. Who's got the best story? And it's moderated by Tyrion, who is at that moment a prisoner. He's in chains. He's been arrested for treason, and he is awaiting judgment. And the assembled great lords of Westeros allow the man on trial to chair the meeting, run the nominations, propose the winner, and design the entire future system of government of the Seven Kingdoms. And then his own candidate's first act as king is to sentence him to be hanged, which is the punishment. Edmure Tully stands up to nominate himself and gets told to sit down by a teenager, which, honestly, is the most realistic part of the whole scene. Sam suggests democracy. Everyone laughs at him, which, given the alternative they land on, is a psychic in a wheelchair, chosen on the basis of narrative quality, feels like the crowd being a bit hard on Sam. I said that was the last of them, and then I remembered about 4 more, so we're going to keep going for a bit. Nothing here connects to anything else either, which I appreciate is not much of a sales pitch, but it's nearly the end, and I'm enjoying myself. Balon Greyjoy. We touched on him with Theon, but he deserves a moment of his own, because his actual strategic thinking is a marvel. The situation is this. Robb Stark has offered him a crown and independence in exchange for hitting the Lannisters from the sea. Balon turns it down. Fine. He'd rather take than be given. That's his whole thing. I understand the philosophy, even if I think it's daft. So what does he take? He invades the north. The north, in autumn, heading into a winter that the Meisters have been sending white ravens about. With an army that is, by design, entirely infantry. The Ironborn don't do cavalry. They don't have the land for horses. Their whole military culture is boats and axes. And he sends this force of foot soldiers into the largest, emptiest, coldest landmass in Westeros. Hundreds of miles from any coastline they can actually resupply from. To occupy castles they haven't the numbers to garrison, in a country whose entire population would rather die than accept them, while the only army that could have protected them is 800 miles south. And his stated reason is that the north is weak right now because Robb's away. Which is true. And it's true in exactly the way that a bear's den is empty when the bear's out. The bear comes back. Meanwhile, sitting immediately to his south is the Westerlands, the richest region in Westeros, coastal, undefended because Tywin's entire army is in the Riverlands. Lannisport is right there, an enormous wealthy port city with no fleet in it, because the Lannister fleet got burned at anchor by Balon himself in the last rebellion and never properly rebuilt. He could have sailed 30 miles, sacked the wealthiest port in the world, taken more gold than the Iron Islands have seen in their entire history, and been home before anyone noticed. He picks the tundra, because Ned Stark's ghost annoys him, essentially. And then he leaves Theon and 30 men holding Winterfell for months without sending so much as a rowing boat to help. And when it collapses, he blames Theon. Which, yes, obviously. Then Dorne, and I'll be honest, this one's less funny than it is a bit sad. Doran Martell has one of the strongest hands in Westeros and never plays it. Dorne is unconquerable. The Targaryens tried with dragons and failed, which is the only place that's ever true. It's got 50,000 spears. It's got deserts and mountains and passes that eat armies. Doran's whole game is patience, and there's a version of this where the patience pays off enormously. And then Alaria Sand and the Sand Snakes stab him on his own terrace and stab his son on a boat and take the country in an afternoon. And the plan is what exactly? Kill Marcella, who was a guest under their protection, betrothed to a Dornish prince, and the daughter of the woman who commands the Lannister armies. Provoke a war with a continental power, and then hand the country over to Daenerys the moment she asks, for free in exchange for nothing. Illyria's grievance is real. Oberyn was murdered, and a liar before him, and there's a legitimate case for burning it all down. But she doesn't burn it down. She kills the one Lannister who'd done nothing to anyone, ends the one hostage arrangement that was actually keeping Dorne safe, and then dies chained to a wall in a cell, watching her daughter rot, which is exactly what Cersei promised she'd do and did. 2 episodes later, Euron's got the lot of them. The unconquerable kingdom taken by a man in a boat because the people who took it over had a plan that ended at the murder and hadn't thought about the following week. There's that gap again. I said I'd only say it once, so I won't say it again. Then Melisandre and Stannis, which I'll keep short because it's the one that actually upsets me. Stannis is stuck in the snow outside Winterfell. His cell swords have gone. His horses are dead. Melisandre tells him that King's blood will break the storm and win him the throne, and Stannis lets her burn Shireen for it, and the storm breaks. That's the part nobody talks about. It works. The snow melts, the road opens, and he marches. And half his army deserts overnight, because it turns out that even men who kill people for a living have limits. And his wife hangs herself, and Melisandre gets on a horse and rides away before the battle. And he loses in about 4 minutes to a cavalry charge and dies against a tree. He got exactly what he was promised, and it destroyed him. Not because the prophecy was false, because it was true, and true was worthless, and he'd been so busy asking whether it would work that nobody ever asked what would happen afterwards. Which is, when you think about it, the whole show in one bonfire. Then Varys, who I keep going back and forth on. Varys is the best informed man in the world for about 6 seasons. His little birds are everywhere. He knows things before they've finished happening. And his stated principle, the thing he says over and over, is that he serves the realm. Not a king, not a queen. The realm, the people, the small folk who get burned regardless of who wins. And his method for serving them is to back Targaryen restoration for 20 years. He backs Viserys. Viserys, who tells his own sister he'd let 40,000 Dothraki and their horses have her if it got him his throne back. Varys knows this. He has people in Pentos. He knows exactly what Viserys is, and he keeps the money flowing anyway, because the name's right. Then he backs Daenerys, sight unseen, across an ocean, on the basis of reports. Then he switches to Aegon in some readings, though we're on the show tonight, so let's not. And then, at the very end, having finally got the queen he spent 2 decades installing, he decides she's not the right one after about 6 weeks of actually being in the room with her, which, to be fair to him, he's now the only person doing the job properly, and starts writing letters to every great house in Westeros announcing Jon's parentage. Openly. In a castle. On paper. While the queen he's betraying is upstairs. He doesn't encode them. He doesn't use a cutout. The master of whisperers, whose entire professional existence has been built on nobody ever proving anything, writes it down and hands it to a girl in a kitchen. And he tells Tyrion he's doing it, and Tyrion tells Daenerys, and that's Varys done. I think there's something almost touching in it, actually. He'd spent his whole life being the man in the corner who never commits. And the one time he picked a side properly and moved fast, he did it like an amateur, because he'd never actually had to. And one last one, the Stark sisters. Season 7, which I have never fully forgiven. The setup is that Littlefinger is at Winterfell, trying to drive a wedge between Sansa and Arya, using a letter Sansa wrote under duress in King's Landing as a child. And the payoff, as we've said, is that it doesn't work, and he ends up on the floor. But the middle is Sansa and Arya having a series of increasingly vicious private conversations in which Arya threatens to cut her sister's face off and wear it, and Sansa searches Arya's room and finds a bag of faces, and both of them appear to be about 90 seconds from murdering each other. And then in the trial, they reveal that they'd worked it out ages ago and were playing him, which is fine as a twist, except that the entire performance took place in empty rooms with the doors shut. Littlefinger isn't in any of those scenes. He isn't watching. He isn't listening. There's no audience for the play they're supposedly staging. 2 people who are already in complete agreement about a plan spent several days doing an elaborate impression of falling out alone to nobody, apparently for the practice. I've heard the argument that they knew Littlefinger's birds were in the walls, And honestly, I'd accept it if the show had spent 4 seconds establishing it. And I'd accept it more if the conversations didn't play as though both actors had been told they meant every word. Which they clearly had, because you can see it. Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams are not doing a bit in those scenes, they're doing a fight. Anyway, it works. Peter Baelish is dead, and I'm not going to pretend I wasn't cheering, but if the sisters were pretending, they were pretending in a soundproofed room. And if they weren't, then the two of them very nearly ended House Stark over a letter written by a terrified child 8 years earlier, and only stopped because a monk told them off. So that's the lot. Or not the lot, obviously. I've left out the Blackfires entirely, and the whole business with the Faith and the Sparrows in Old Town, and I never once mentioned Quaithe, who I still don't understand. But that's most of it. And there's one thing I keep landing on when I go through all of this, and it's not really about anyone being stupid. It's that almost every disaster in this world comes from the same place. Someone assumes other people are playing by their rules. Ned assumed honour. He assumed that if he showed Cersei the truth, she'd behave the way a person who'd been shown the truth ought to behave. Robb assumed guest right, which had held for 8,000 years, and then didn't, once, at the worst possible moment. Tyrion assumed that everyone at a table wants something you can offer them. Daenerys assumed that people who'd been freed would stay grateful. Littlefinger assumed that everyone, everywhere, is alone, and for sale, and then walked into a house where 3 people loved each other. Rhaenyra assumed an oath sworn in front of the realm would still mean something 20 years later. The Night King assumed nobody would improvise, and every single one of them was reasoning from the best evidence they had. That's the thing. None of these are stupid assumptions. They're all completely defensible, right up until the second they aren't, and then the cost is a continent. I think that's why the show worked as well as it did, when it worked. It's not really about good people and bad people, it's about people who've each worked out a set of rules that explains the world to them, walking into rooms full of people who've worked out different ones, and finding out. Anyway, I've got a few of these in mind for the future if you fancy them. The dance properly, with the dragon seeds and Vermithor and the whole mess of it. Everything that went wrong in Dawn, which is a shorter video than you'd think, and an angrier one. Stannis Baratheon, top to bottom, who I maintain is the most interesting man in the story. Maybe just a long, slow one on Essos, the Free Cities, Braavos and the Titan, and how the whole place actually works, since we never really got to see it properly. Some other time though? Anyway, it's late and I've been talking for 2 hours about a man who told a queen he'd worked out her secret and then got burned by her dragon. I think that's enough from me. Good night and mind the phrase.